Okay, so what happens in our body and brain when we're experiencing stress? Well, historically, we've talked about stressors invoking a fight or flight response in our bodies. Basically, what that means is that the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and starts to prepare us to either fight with the source of the stress or to flee from it. So our heart rate accelerates, we pump plenty of blood to our muscles, we release a bunch of adrenaline to give our muscles extra power, we secrete a bunch of stored glucose into our bloodstream so we have plenty of fuel for our muscles. Our lungs are going to breathe faster, ventilating and giving plenty of oxygen to our blood. Our stomach stops digesting our most recent meal in favor of, the glucose that's being secreted out of the liver. And then we've got the pupils dilating so we can see really well. Just pretty much everything's ready for us to fight or to flee with the stressor. According to Psych Ch, the general adaptation syndrome refers to our body's ability to cope with a stressor. And so you see on the far left where in phase 1 the stressor occurs. What's really interesting is that your stress resistance initially dips below the resting rate when you first experience a stressor. And this helps to explain why we freeze when we're presented with something really scary. That all animals freeze when confronted with a stressor. For some reason, us humans really berate ourselves for freezing, but we do. When something startling happens, there's that brief couple of ticks where we're like, and then our ability to cope with the stressor kicks in. But it takes a second. And unfortunately, during that second is when, the toddler can get into the street, or something bad can happen in that couple of seconds. But that's how we respond. We have that freeze response. And think about animals that are predated, right? That are hunted. They freeze, and that's actually really adaptive because a predator can't really see you very well if you hold still. And so maybe this is a flashback to that kind of adaptive strategy. Long story short, after phase 1, once the stressor has occurred and you've sort of gotten over that moment of freezing, then phase 2 comes in, and that's where you can resist the stressor. You can cope. Now, because you're designed for a fight or a flight, coping is usually going to come in the form of fighting or fleeing, right? So you're either going to have to, physically overwhelm the stressor and make it go away, or you're going to have to get away from it. Now, we were evolved in an environment where there were that kind of physical threat really commonly, right? An animal could jump out of the trees onto our back when we're coming back from the water source, and the animal wants to eat us. And so, being able to marshal your resources to be able to run away from, the mountain lion that's jumped on your back, or maybe we have to go fight against the other village because they've been encroaching on our hunting area or whatever, so we have to go fight. Today we don't have a ton of those. I mean, unfortunately there are still situations where we could be attacked and things like that, but for the most part our stressors are not that acute, where it's clear this is a stressor, and if I can fight it off or I can flee from it, then I won't have this stressor anymore. So I like to give the example of, let's say you're going for a hike in the woods. You went by yourself for some reason, and you're hiking along, thinking your happy little nature thoughts, everything's very pleasant, and then you hear, really loud kind of crashing noises in the bushes off to the side of the trail, and you see just sort of the vague form of a pretty large furry animal in there. And as far as you know, you're alone out here, so your first interpretation is that large furry animal is probably, a wild animal. Immediately you're going to feel just this surge of adrenaline go through you as you're like, ah! During that initial, phase 1, when alarms are being marshaled, you're going to have maybe so much adrenaline, it may even feel like it's like coming out your fingertips, if you've ever had that feeling. It's like, okay, now you have had your initial response, now you're going to start to respond. it's a big furry animal, your first response might be to try and get away from it. So you can imagine all those changes that happen in your body thanks to the sympathetic nervous system will help you to run from that animal, right? Your pupils are dilated so you can get back through the forest without tripping and falling and stuff like that. You got your lungs giving you plenty of oxygen. You got plenty of blood making it to your muscles because your heart's pounding so hard, and the adrenaline's made you, you're stronger and have longer endurance than you would have otherwise. Phase 2 can last about 20 minutes before you're probably going to reach exhaustion and you can't run anymore. So Salier's general adaptation syndrome gives us this very narrow, acute stress response. Something's trying to get you, and you're going to either fight it or flee from it. That's not how most stressors are in modern life. And it's not how necessarily all people respond. When confronted with a stressor, men are really prone to feel like they either have to fight with it or flee from it. Even when it's a non-physically threatening stressor, their first response is to fight with it or flee from it. So think about stereotype men. I'm not talking about any of the men listening to this, nothing personal, of course, but stereotype man comes home from work, he's had a stressful day, maybe he has a lot of pressures, a lot of things he has to get done, or maybe his boss is really a jerk, but the man feels like he can't quit, things like that. So he comes home and his wife's like, "Hi honey, how's your day?" And he doesn't really want to talk about it, and he goes into his office and watches some YouTube videos or something and kind of tries to forget about his day. That's a classic fleeing response. I'm experiencing stress and I don't want to deal with it. I can't deal with it. I can't fight it. So my only other choice is to flee from it. And it's pretty typical for men. Men will flee things that they can't directly fight. And it frustrates women because women tend and befriend. When women are under stress, they want to reach out to other people. They want to talk about it. They want to do good deeds for other people. That makes them feel less stressed out. And so when their husband comes home and he's had a bad day and wants to go hide in his office, that actually is stressful for the woman, and so then she wants to go and tend and befriend him. And so she brings him a drink. Are you thirsty? Want to talk about it? Right? And no, I don't. I want to flee. But then she keeps pushing it because she wants to tend and befriend. And then he's like, okay, good. Well, this I can fight with. And so now we have an argument because this is something I can fight with. This is something that I can deal with. So when a person is under stress, their gender, their sex, helps to determine in part how they're going to respond to that stressor in an either fight or flight response or an attend and befriend response. Okay, now what about stress and health? Okay. I already mentioned that part of the general adaptation syndrome is to elevate your heart rate, right? And to allow you to convey more blood to your extremities and things like that. So being under stress elevates your blood pressure. It's supposed to, but it's only supposed to do it for like 20 minutes. The fact that most of us don't have those kinds of acute stressors, but instead have chronic daily hassles, means that for a lot of people, we're walking around with our sympathetic nervous system having slightly elevated our blood pressure. And that can lead to coronary heart disease. The way we were designed, we were supposed to have our heart rate get elevated for like a 20-minute response. And then our parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to kick in and reverse the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. But if the stressor never really ends, or if the stressor was never intense enough to give a full resistance response, the parasympathetic nervous system won't kick in and do its part. And so you sort of end up with just like chronic stress response that's never really resolved. And that's the kind of thing that can contribute to heart disease. Now, there are some characteristics that we carry around with us that make us more or less prone to developing heart disease as a function of stress. There are some people who are what we call type A personalities. Some people think that if you're really organized and what I would call anal retentive, that that means that you're a type A personality. That's not necessarily true. A type A personality has certain really specific characteristics. One is that they're very competitive, they're very hard driving, and then they have certain people with type A personality have this extra component of hostility towards others who they perceive to be interfering with their ability to achieve their own goals. So if you have a type A personality with the hostility component, that's associated with higher rates of coronary heart disease. Type B personalities are people who are much more likely to just sort of go with the flow. They're much less hard driving, much less competitive, and they're much less likely to be victims of stressful situations. They sort of take things as they come. And so as a function of that, they are in a certain way less likely to develop heart disease. So it's a combination of stressors and then probably your unique personality type and the way that you respond to stressors that helps to determine whether you're at risk for heart disease. Your problem, Mr. Fitzhugh, is that you're a type A personality in a Model T body. Oh, that's funny. You can't be so hard driving and stuff if you're going to be this overweight, Mr. Fitzhugh. This is not good for you. It can contribute to heart disease because, of course, obesity in and of itself can contribute to heart disease also. Okay, so here we have another aspect that contributes to an individual's likelihood of developing heart disease, and that is, okay, so you're under stress. And then you have a pessimistic way of explaining your circumstances. Pessimists are the sort who say, it's never going to get better. I deserve this because I'm a loser anyway. You know, these kinds of negative thoughts are associated with being a pessimist. And pessimists who have those kinds of thoughts are more likely to develop coronary heart disease than people who are just neutral and don't really aren't negative or positive. And pessimists are way more likely to develop heart disease than an optimist is. An optimist who casts the scenario as temporary or who casts the scenario as a challenge rather than a threat, things like that. I want to really distinguish, though, between optimists and then what we call Pollyannas. Pollyannas are people who say things like, wow, I found this weird lump in my breast. I'm sure it's nothing. There's no need to go to the doctor. That's not an optimist. That is a person with their head in the sand. So I'm talking about those kinds of people who are realistic but are able to cast the threat, the stressor, as a challenge rather than a threat. All right, here we have the relationship between stress and your probability of catching something as simple as a cold. The psychological stress index is a measure of how much stress a person perceives themselves to be under. And as you can see, the higher you are on the stress index, the more likely you are to catch a cold after you've been exposed to the cold virus. Man, they must have paid people to participate in this study, because the study involved taking the psychological stress index and then having a Q-tip that's been loaded with a cold virus rubbed around on your nasal cavities, right? Rubbed around inside your nose. So we're exposing you to a cold, and we want to see whether you catch it or not. And the higher the person was on the stress index, the more likely they were to catch a cold after that exposure. So stress certainly seems to reduce your immune function, is the idea with that. How about this one? How does stress contribute to illness? Okay, so we've got persistent stressors on the top left over there, combined with negative emotions like being pessimistic or type A with hostility. One thing that we do when we're under stress is we might do unhealthy behaviors as a way to sort of make ourselves feel better, eating comfort foods or smoking or drinking alcohol, something like that. Maybe depriving ourselves of sleep, thinking that, well, I'll be able to get through this task and then I won't be under stress anymore. So those unhealthy behaviors oftentimes stem from persistent stressors plus negative emotions. Persistent stressors plus negative emotions also cause our body to release stress hormones, cortisol in particular. And cortisol has been linked to heart disease, to immune suppression, and then also to other kinds of symptoms that are attributable to autonomic nervous system functioning, like headaches, high blood pressure, things like that. So the persistent stressor and your negative emotions do not directly cause the health-related things. We think instead your persistent stressors and your negative emotions cause the release of these stress hormones, which in turn increase your risk of these health-related factors. All right, so how can we cope with stress? And this is really where psychology comes in. So far I've been basically explaining to you that it's worthwhile to try and, cope with stress in a positive way. So now how can we do it? Well, there are two main ways to cope with stress. And the first one is problem-focused coping, which is where you try to change the stress-inducing situation. So, for example, let's use the stressor, the chronic stressor that a lot of us deal with, which is commuting to get to work or to school or whatever, having, to combat traffic and stuff like that. So problem-focused coping would tell us, let's try and change this situation. So what could we do? Maybe we could schedule our work hours or our school at off-peak travel times. Something that I find less stressful that other people might find more stressful is that I volunteer to teach in the early morning so that I can avoid most of the traffic on my way to work. So I teach a 7:30 a.m. class. Most people aren't on the road by that time. It's certainly not as heavy as it is by 8:30. So it's worth it to me to get up a little earlier because I don't find that stressful. And then get out, get on the road before most people do, and then get home. I get done working early so that I can get home in the off-peak travel time too. So for me, I changed the situation by requesting to arrive at work at a different time. Another thing people can do is move, right? Move closer to work or school. That sometimes people do that. Take a different route is another problem-focused coping strategy. Find a different way to get to your target. Maybe don't just get on the freeway. Look on Google Maps and find out other routes to go, right? These are problem-focused coping strategies for dealing with a commute. Sometimes you can't change the situation. And so instead you might invoke an emotion-focused coping strategy. So what you do in this strategy is you acknowledge, okay, I can't move. I can't change my hours. That class is only offered at the time that traffic is heavy, or my boss demands that I be at work at 8. I can't change that. I can't move. All the routes between my house and where I'm going are all equally loaded. It doesn't matter. They're all full. So what can I do? Now I'm going to attend to my own emotional needs so that I can deal with this stressor better. Okay, so I teach at 7:30 a.m., but I also teach at 5:30 p.m. because I have morning and evening classes. I got the split shift. Okay, so when I go to campus at 5:30 p.m., I'm traveling with the people who just got off of work. So what can I do? Well, first off, I tried to find a different route, but I did come across it really doesn't matter which way I go. It's all equally packed. So now I attend to my emotional needs. Maybe I can make the trip less stressful as I sit in traffic. Well, one thing I do for sure is actually a problem-focused strategy, which is I leave early enough that I'm not under time pressure. But even if I don't do that, I listen to a book on tape on my way to work on that traffic time so that I kind of don't care that I'm sitting in traffic. I literally don't care. I only listen to, fun, fictional kinds of, things that might get me all engaged and swept away. I like to listen to mysteries. That's really fun. And sometimes I've even been known to get to school and think, dang it, I'm here. And I was just about to find out who did it. I'm just going to sit in the car for a second. I actually have come to like that traffic trip because I get to listen to my book longer. So that's an emotion-focused coping strategy. There are different ways, different stressors demand different strategies. Different cultures encourage different strategies. In individualistic societies like the U.S., we do a lot of problem-focused coping. We try to change the situation as much as we can. We're like, I don't have to live like this. I'm going to change the situation. I'm going to change, the law should be changed, these kinds of things. Collectivistic societies, which is pretty much the rest of the world, they're much more likely to engage in emotion-focused coping because they realize that the situation can't be changed. They feel like the situation can't be changed. So they figure, I've got to change my response. So, different people, different cultures value different ways of coping with stressors. Now, resilience is your ability to cope with a stressor effectively, and there are certain things that affect how resilient you are in the face of a stressor. One is whether you perceive that you have control over the stressor. In this experiment, we have the executive rat on the left, and when he gets a shock on his tail, he can make the shock turn off by spinning that wheel that he's touching with his hand. The guy in the middle is called the subordinate rat. He's going to get the same shock as the executive rat, but he can't control it. The executive rat is controlling the shock. And so the subordinate rat is just getting shocked whenever the executive does, and he stops getting shocked whenever the executive turns it off. The control rat is just over there living in the same circumstances, but not getting shocked and not doing anything really. What they found is that the executive rat, who was in charge of his own destiny, was much less likely to show signs of stress, like heart disease or ulcers, than the subordinate rat. The executive rat looked a lot more like the control rat as far as his health than the subordinate rat did. Being out of control of the stress situation contributes to stress health related responses. So feeling like you're in control. Now the thing is, I really want to emphasize feeling like you're in control, because a lot of times you're not really in control, and the truth is you're just that powerless subordinate rat waiting for the shock to go off. But if you feel like you can do something to alleviate your stress, to deal with the stressor head on, that will make it less likely that you'll become sick from it. There we go. Explanatory style. Now I already mentioned optimists and pessimists. Pessimists are much more likely to have negative effects. Optimists are much more likely to be resilient in the face of stress. So the little engine who just plain gives up. I know I can't. I know I can't. You want to be the little engine who could, right? You want to be that kind of optimist who says, you know what, keep trying. I'm going to find a way around this problem. Something can be done. And that helps you become more resilient. Having social support. Here we have somebody who appears to be going into the hospital and has their friends all surrounding them. They know that people are pulling for them. They know that they've got support. It makes it easier to deal with a stressor when you don't feel alone. Because being alone is stressful in and of itself. Feeling like you're isolated is stressful enough. Feeling like people have your back will make you feel stronger to cope with the stressor. Here we have an interesting little graphic that shows us your age in years across the bottom, and then the percent who have reported high support, having lots of social support. And the age group, 15 to really 34, has the highest rates of social support. Interestingly, that's also the same age group who tends to report having the most stressors in their life. So at that critical time when we have the most life changes, the most things that could make our lives, could be stressful for us, we also have the widest network of people who we can lean on and feel supported by. So, what can you do to manage stress? You're under stress, you can't change the situation, what can you do? One of the best things that we can do to alleviate the effects of stress in our body is to engage in some kind of aerobic activity. When they talk about for health, you only need to do 15 to 20 minutes of aerobic activity a day. They're talking about coping with stressors. What aerobic exercise does for us is tricks our body into thinking we've been chased by the bear, right? We've had that acute stress instance, and then our parasympathetic nervous system will kick in and help us out. So you see that you've got the three groups that all started out roughly equal on their depression score. The aerobic exercise group had a significant drop after engaging in exercise compared to the other two groups. So aerobic exercise absolutely is beneficial. Biofeedback is a technique where you learn what your stress responses feel like, so that you can start to get conscious control over your body when you can feel that you're starting to experience stress responses. So like when your heart rate starts to go up, you can do some deep breathing exercises and things to calm yourself down and tell yourself, I don't need to be getting all stressed out, this is no big deal, calm down, and you can help to alleviate those your likelihood of high blood pressure, dietary digestive problems, stuff like that. Meditation, you don't have to get into a full-blown transcendental meditation to achieve the benefits of meditation. Sitting still and clearing your mind. Some people have a mantra that they repeat over and over because that helps them focus on the mantra and ignore intrusive thoughts, whatever it takes. Clearing your mind. I am not very good at clearing my own mind, so I actually have a relaxation tape that I listen to where it has repetitive things said, and I'm able to listen to that voice and clear my mind. Otherwise, I find myself having intrusive thoughts like, when I get done with this, what I'm going to do next is, and that's really not the spirit of meditation. You want to clear your mind, right, and it helps to dissipate those stress hormones. Relaxation exercises. Here's a Zen garden where you rake and make perfect, shapes with the rake. Nice relaxation exercises. If we go back to that chart where we saw the aerobic exercise group doing so well, relaxation is better than nothing. If you're in the no treatment group and you stay the same versus a relaxation group, the relaxation group improved. They had a drop in their depression scores. So, if you don't want to do aerobic exercise, or maybe today isn't the day when you have the timer that you have to go out again, so you don't want to get all sweaty or something, relaxation can give you significant benefits. All right, that concludes the stress conversation. So thank you for listening, and we'll come back and talk about flourishing in the next segment.